from Music for All and presented by Yamaha. Welcome to teaching social emotional learning through music. And now, here's your host, Scott Edgar.
Welcome to our next episode of Teaching Social and Emotional Learning Through Music. It is such an honor today to welcome Scott Sheehan, president of NAFME, here to join us. Now, Scott is one of those people who I have come to respect at a very, very deep level, because as he's risen to his current position as a leader, as one of the most prominent leaders in the field of music education, he's still teaching. He's still in the classroom. We were having a conversation before we came on today about he was at an elementary school recruiting. He's one of those people who is as genuine as he seems, and it is such an honor. Scott, welcome to our show.
Thank you, Scott, and certainly my pleasure and honor to be here with you.
Such a powerful role that you've assumed, and you've just done such great work amidst one of the more challenging times in our profession of giving strength, of giving journey, of giving vision to NAFME. And we just can't wait to see how all the hard work that you are doing right now comes to fruition. But there's a world that you're living right now that it's like, okay, so you're in Pennsylvania, but then you're in Virginia. Tell us a little bit about your journey. Tell us a little bit about what you do.
Sure. Well, it really is sort of two jobs at the same time. And I guess I sort of feel like I'm drinking from a fire hose most days, I'll be honest with you, which probably isn't the best SEL work for myself. However, we can get into that later. But no, I am still an active full-time high school music educator. I am teaching, as you mentioned, bands, jazz band, wind ensemble, concert band. We're in marching band season, just finished up camp, had our first football game on Friday night. Was great, received great accolades for our first performance out. So that was always a positive for the students. It was a fun night. And I also teach music theory, AP music theory, a couple levels of guitar with some modern band mixed in, and a really cool elective called rock, rap, and revolution. So that's, and I'm the music department chair, K-12 music department chair here in the Hollidaysburg School District, and as you mentioned, in central Pennsylvania. So that's part one. And then part two is working, certainly as and truly my honor and privilege to be serving as the NAFME national president right now. And really, I should say part three is full-time husband, father, grandfather, dogs. Yesterday was National Dog Day, so we've got the whole gamut of the family stuff too that I really, as best as I can, try to prioritize that in my life, which I think is important to mention on this podcast in particular, is that as we balance work, our commitments to our professional organizations and to our craft and those sorts of things, that we also take time to keep that family nucleus, those friends, that downtime is so important. And I also fulfill my cup with music too. I'm in a brass band, and we just had a community band concert last night. And so I'm one of those people that like to go. I like to be moving and going, but at the same time, I also know when I need to step back most of the time.
So we're going to get into the weeds earlier than I think that we were going to. So if you don't mind, I'm just going to kind of go with that, because I think that is actually the reality of so many of our teachers right now, is that they're struggling with actually the balance that you just spoke to, that, you're a husband, you're a father, you're a grandfather, you're a dog father. We just adopted a golden retriever. Awesome. And it's totally changed so many of the things. Like at night, okay, well, the dog needs walked, right? So, how, and I'm not asking for the secret sauce, and I'm not asking for anything that's like, oh my goodness, because I know so many people come to me and say, Scott, how do you find balance? And I just look at them and say, I don't find balance. Are there any things that you have found that have worked? Because so many people are pulling at you right now, so many people, including me, and saying, hey, Scott, can you help us? Can you, and some of the things we can say no to, some of the things we just can't. So what are some things that go through your mind when you're thinking about everyone who's wanting a piece of you?
So I think that for me, and I'm not going to say this is universal for everyone, but for me, I have some advice from my mom. I think, our parents know us best when we're younger. And she said, I'll never forget this. I was having a tough time in college, and she said, you have to have something every day to look forward to. And that might be the smallest thing. It might be a Snickers bar. It might be, taking a 10-minute walk around your dorm after class before you go in and have to get into the next thing. But you need to have something every day to look forward to. And for me, I've just drilled that into who I am and how I operate. And so it might be looking forward to dinner, to sit down with my family and have a nice meal together. It might be getting together on the weekend with friends. It might be looking forward to introducing the next piece in rehearsal. So for each of us, it is going to be something different. But that piece in my psyche that's built in now to having something to look forward to is so important. Like today, I had 3 things to look forward to. I had some time this morning to go to the elementary schools, as you mentioned, and talk with them about the importance of music and all the things that they can look forward to joining the band. And then I was looking forward to this, to getting the chance to talk with you today. And then this evening, I don't have any meetings. And so for one night, for the first time, and I'm not joking around, in about 3 months, I have an evening free that I'm going to jump in the swimming pool and relax and chill out at home for a little bit. I might cut my grass. That's also another little piece of my secret sauce. I love to work in the yard. That's another piece of my thing to look forward to, is landscaping and working in the yard and so on. The other thing that I think is important in all of that, besides sort of compartmentalizing and putting time where it needs to be, is, and this is hard, this is really hard, but there are things that we can control and things we can't control. And I know that sounds so simple, like, duh, that concept's been around forever. However, to really look at that at the deepest level of what, because as you say, there's so much that's coming at us as music educators, as leaders, as advocates, no matter what it is, we have all this pull on us, and we have to sometimes step back, at least for me, to say, this is completely out of my control. This is not something NAFME can do. This is not something PMEA, because I'm in Pennsylvania, could do. This, or in my school, this is not something that the music department can accomplish alone. And so then it becomes, well, who does have the control? Who does have the power to make those decisions? And do I have any influence there? And I think that's the other piece. And if the answer is no, 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 then I need to let that off my back. And I need to not let that get into my head and kind of drive me down when I have so many others that are looking for me to lift them up in so many different ways. Whether, as I said, that's NAFME, that's school, that's home. So that sort of circle of influence and circle of control is just really paramount to me, as well as looking for things to look forward to.
You know, when you talk about things to look forward to, when we're done with our time today, I get to go have the honor and privilege to facilitate a rehearsal with the Lake Forest College Wind Ensemble, and we're breaking the spine on Blue Shades tonight. And I don't know how that one's going to go, but the joy that comes from that is, I was sharing that with our 6-year-old son. He said, "You're doing Bluey Shades," and I said, I'm sure Frank DeKelly would be fine with that.
That's awesome. I love it.
So, you know, Scott, as you were talking through so many of those things, I'm thinking about, well, how do we have some kind of compass that guides our decision making, that what elevates? And to me, I think that comes down to priorities. Like, how do we prioritize things in our life that are non-negotiable and that take a hit when we have to navigate maybe not meeting those priorities? You are doing such a great job at the national level of seeing things, facilitating things, giving voice to things in the profession. What do you see as priorities for music education right now in 2023?
Well, I think there's the obvious piece. We call it a teacher shortage, but it's really not a teacher shortage. We know that it's really, there are plenty of qualified music educators and educators in general. I don't want to compartmentalize this just to music. So when I'm speaking, I'm really talking more broadly. But the teacher shortage is really the fact that the teaching profession has really come under fire, under scrutiny at so many different levels. It's been politicized and really pulled apart. And so we know there are teachers all over the country who just have chosen not to teach. And that has impacted the ability to recruit teachers, to retain teachers who are already there. You know, students that we would identify in high schools as, hey, you would be a phenomenal music educator someday. And they're like, not for me, time out here. And so I think that is one of the top priorities right now for the profession. And that we're approaching this in a lot of different ways. I think it's a many, Bob Morrison always likes to say, the three-headed monster. I think that this particular issue is probably 16 or 17 hydras with all sorts of heads rearing up at us. So I definitely think that at the moment, and I don't see this changing, I'll be honest with you, for some time, is the need to look at public perception of education in general. And then, of course, the importance of music education as part of that well-rounded subject, well-rounded education that the SEL law, we can get into that piece later if you want to, but, from a policy perspective, there's that. But, just from a holistic perspective, music is part of how we find ourselves in the world, and how we know who we are, and how we navigate, and how we know what's right and wrong, and how we identify. And so I think that critical piece that music plays is there. And so to make sure that has its rightful place in the education system, and that we have qualified teachers to teach it, it's a huge issue. And there are coalitions. There's a workforce coalition that's happening right now. I'm sure you're familiar with that. I know that NAFME is supporting that work as well. NAFME put out a very large report just earlier this year called The Blueprint for Strengthening the Music Teacher Profession. And that was after 2.5 years of research looking at universities and the challenges that people have to get into schools of music, the challenges that students who are in a school of music to get the music education degree have throughout that 4, maybe 5 years. And then how do we support teachers in those first 5 years? So we have some very, very rich data that we've gleaned from this report. It's available on the NAFME website. And then but identifying the issues is just a piece of it. It's what do we do next? How do we implement those ideas? And this is way bigger than NAFME. This needs to be the entire profession, and quite frankly, society. Anyone that cares, that knows that music belongs in schools, needs to be part of this work to move forward and how we tackle this, because it is such a complex problem with so many different angles. And so, yes, there's parts that NAFME can handle, and there are parts that we need to have voice and other people giving us input. And this goes right along with the other big thing that I think we're looking at and facing in music education, and that's the issues that surround equity. So when we talk about equity, we're talking about who has the power and the privilege to make decisions that impact education, music education, and so on. And then that can trickle down into so many different aspects that you can look at it in terms of programming and what kind of literature you're selecting and repertoire you're selecting for your students to study or perform. That's one small piece. The blueprint that I referenced was actually initially started not to necessarily address the teacher shortage and the need for recruiting and retaining. That study started 2.5 years ago with that work to see how our profession could start to look like the students who are in their classrooms across the country, because we know there's a huge disparity between what the music profession, the current music teacher workforce looks like. We're mostly white, we're mostly female, and so on. And we know by 2030, but I really believe it's sooner from the statistics that I've been reading, our schools do not look like that. Our schools are the minority. Whites, so let me say it right. Whites will be in the minority in our schools and public education across the country. And so we need to do something about that. And so initially that study was to do that, because we know students learn best when they can see themselves in their classroom and through the teacher, obviously also through the materials and so on. So this idea of representation, equity, diversity, and inclusion, all of this, I think, is a huge factor. And again, I don't want to speak in too many generalities, because I mean, those are big words. And I'll be honest, and you know this as well as I do, these are politicized words that some people will hammer you for using those words and say, wait, that's not for us, or I'm a parent, I get to decide, and people push back on those words. And what I have really tried to strive to do personally, as well as our NAFME board and the discussions we have with our equity committee, our Equity Leadership Institute, that meets monthly, and by the way, that's open to anybody that's interested in this work. It's just a convening monthly to talk about issues of equity. We really try to talk about the tangibles. And it's important to understand the concepts, but then what does that really mean? And so to put that into action, like for instance, one of the things that has come out is NAFME started a small schools initiative. And that is centered around equity work, in the fact that teachers who are teaching in rural areas might find issues of isolation. It does become an issue of equity. And so that's one tangible that has come from these discussions. There are many other pieces that we're working on. We're also working on an equity resource center for music educators to go and find their pathway for this work, because it can't be a one size fits all. So to put all that together, I'll come up for air here just to say that I think looking at the need to recruit and retain teachers is paramount right now in our profession. And I also think to look at equitable practices and ways that we can truly try to achieve those three golden words, music for all. If we can really truly achieve those three words by looking at our practices, our policies in all the different ways, and it's all of us, it's every organization, it's every school entity, it's every music educator, to say who's in my classroom, who isn't, and why not, and start asking yourselves those really big questions and trying to peel back the layers.
It's huge, because I think back to 2002 when I entered the workforce. I had just graduated from undergrad at Bowling Green State University, and everyone celebrated being a teacher. It was like, wow, you're going to make a huge difference. And the narrative right now, I'm not sure is universally that. And that's a huge problem. To kind of link this to some of our SEL language, it's like, do teachers see themselves in the identity of teachers, right? Do I see a teacher identity in myself? And when the narratives is pushing back on that, it's a tricky hill to climb, especially if you don't have that sense of belonging. I'm going into a community that's appreciated. We're seeing in colleges and universities teachers pre-service teachers who are going through 4 years of rigorous education and then at the end choosing not to go into the workforce. And that is a bitter pill to swallow for me as a teacher educator and for the profession.
Yeah. It's very difficult right now to navigate. The thing about community, though, I think that you hit the nail on the head. One of the anecdotes I really believe is that we can provide a community, and that's the big we. That's not just NAFME or the MEAs. That's all of us, because it's a big community, but yet it's really not, right? We know who each other are, and we're there to lift up and support, provided, and I'm going to kind of check myself on this, provided that people see what you're selling and they want what's there, because that's something that's huge. I think is that not everybody wants what we offer, and I say that we as a general statement. It's not just NAFME or an MEA. I think it can be music education. Why aren't students in our classes? Well, they don't necessarily relate to the music that we play, or maybe the ensemble doesn't fit their interests, or their style of music. And so I think that, there's a community there, but is that community open to adapt and change, and so on. So as much as I want to say, yes, we are that big community, let's all lock arms and work together. We're there to support every music educator now and future music educator. I also think we need to keep our eyes open and our ears to the ground to say, are we providing that type of support, that type of care and nurturing that teachers need and want, that's relevant to them? Because I think that's huge.
And, when we start to think about that sense of community and do you belong, that's a tricky thing, because there are a few curricular areas that I know of that rely on tradition as much as we do. Right? Tradition is just so rich. And that's not a bad thing. But sometimes those traditions become so locked in as dogma that it locks us into not being able to be flexible enough. And to me, that's what's at the heart of people not being able to see themselves in the profession. And when we talk about how equity and the teacher shortage, I think there's another T word or an F word there, an F word. Ooh, where's he going with this? Flexibility. Yeah. Is the profession flexible enough to open its doors to more people? And that's not something that I know personally I'm always good at.
It's tough. I'll be honest with you. To answer that question is tough, because there's constraints, there's realities of scheduling and time. Time's the great equalizer. We all have 24 hours in a day. We say that, but is there equity within that equality of 24 hours? What do people already come into the room with versus what do people not have the ability or opportunity to do? And so when you think about flexibility, I agree with that. Is there enough flexibility in the day, in the schedule? Is there enough flexibility within the teacher's own background of what we bring to the table now. I mentioned at the opening about me teaching some guitar and some modern band skills. That was not me at all. I was definitely the trumpet guy, playing my trumpet up through high school, all through college, squealing out the high notes in the jazz band, all that sort of thing. That was me. And to see the need to adapt and to change, and as I'll use your word, to be flexible enough to say we need to provide more students with opportunities in our school so that they can come in and create a style of music that's not Maynard Ferguson in a jazz band, or Vaughan Williams or Holst in a concert band or wind ensemble type of thing, or the Blue Devils on the marching band field kind of deal. And so I think for me personally, I saw that need. I saw that, we had that as a goal. And I was willing to go forward and take on my own lessons. I got some guitar lessons and tried to figure that out, looked on YouTube, talked to colleagues, and I've done the modern band training, all that sort of thing through Little Kids Rock Now Music Will. There's great resources out there for people. However, there's still the realities of time. Do we have the time in the day? Or as I mentioned, small schools, you're the only music teacher in a K through 12 setting, or a K through 8 setting. There's one of you and you're trying to do it all. And so how do you choose? How do you pick the priorities of what type of music education is provided? And so that's where it becomes very, very difficult. And for me personally, I would say go to what it is that your community wants. Talk to the parents, talk to the school leadership, talk to the administration, maybe do a little survey, try to get some way that you can get input and some data to help guide that decision making. Because as much as we all love, out in my own case, a great wind ensemble or concert band, maybe that's not what the community wants and would support, as opposed to something that was some more modern music, or something more more relevant to the culture of the community. And that's something we haven't necessarily touched on just yet, but culture is huge when you're looking at that. To be flexible also means to be inquisitive, I think, as to what the culture is telling us within where you go. And especially for young teachers, you go to a new community, you get that first job, you're so excited and you see everything that's out there. But have you really gotten to know the community? Go visit the coffee shop, sit and talk to the people, and meet some people who aren't in the school or don't have children in the school, and listen to what their goals are and what they think. And, are there coffee shops that have music, and what kind of music is that, is being played and sung there? So anyhow, I could go on and on this topic, just because I think that relevance is critical, and listening to the voices of the community and the cultures of certainly the students is key to making that happen.
And I think as you're speaking right now, every single listener is saying, wow, I would love for my kid, my niece, my nephew to be in Scott's care. And that's just because of your heart is so open. Your heart is so flexible. And you and I have been cut from similar cloths, Yeah. And that's been an interesting journey for me personally, but that means I have to wear uncomfortable hats. What's interesting, before I forget, I want to reference, we'll go ahead and put the blueprint that you referenced from NAFME and the notes to the show. So if you're curious learning more about the blueprint, we'll make sure to give that as a resource attached to this episode. So, I want to shift gears just a little bit, but it's not as big of a shift as I think most people would think. I want to get into the world of SEL, and everything we've talked about up until now is SEL, right? We could start to talk about what are the skill sets that are needed to facilitate that. And so many of the things we've been talking about are, yes, in response to student needs, but they've really been teacher needs. How does the teacher need to be a little bit more flexible, and what are skill sets and ways to do that? How can we learn more about the culture? We hear about being culturally relevant, culturally responsive. All of those things are in play as we're talking about what this looks like. So, Scott, as we're starting to think about social and emotional learning, and just 5% more of a formal way than what sometimes people think, what does social and emotional learning mean to you, as it's literally become one of the most prominent educational buzzwords in our country?
Well, for me, I have kind of boiled it down, and I have appreciated your sessions, from day one of the pandemic. You are right there helping us to understand more about social and emotional learning for ourselves as teachers, as well as for our students. I've really appreciated that. So thank you very, very much. But for me, I think it comes down to students being able to make positive and healthy decisions for themselves, And that goes in the most broad sense. They're making decisions about their education, that they have a voice and a choice. I know those are key terms, but I really take that to heart. I often do surveying with my students. We always talk about not only maybe the repertoire that we're going to play in the ensemble or how we're going to grade things, and there's constant, every aspect of what we do. I want the students to feel like they have ownership in there. And so that ownership and that partnership, if you will, in their learning and in their education, I believe helps to guide them towards making healthy and appropriate choices towards what comes next in their educational experience. So I think that for me, SEL in so many ways is them learning in the social structures of what the ensemble may be, or the music class may be, or the school setting at large provide, and then how they tap into how they're feeling about those things, into those emotions of this is a positive experience, or no, this was a really negative experience. Right before I got on this call, I had a student leader come to me talking to me about her experience on Friday evening at the football game and how that didn't go the way she thought it would. And we had to just break that down a little bit and talk about some individuals in her section and how that made her feel. And we really had to get into that deep, so that, again, back to the kind of the way I view this, that she could make the next decisions in that social structure as a leader that would be positive for her section, for herself, so that it's a win-win and not I'm coming down on people and now there's a negative experience and now people don't want to be here, or whatever it may end up resulting in. She's trying to see this as a proactive, as how can we turn what was a questionable situation into a positive. So I see that literally, daily, right in my own classroom, in my own, with my own students. But I really think that's what it's about, is helping the students to guide themselves, that kind of self-regulation, that self-discovery and exploration of who they are, how they make decisions, what drives them, through that emotional process, and that it's okay to just come up for air, as I said earlier when I started, and say, hey, I just need a minute, and I'll be okay, but I need a minute, because our society pushes us faster, constant, and we don't always take that time to think about a decision or the impact, or the for every action there's a reaction, right? And so do we think about what that reaction may be? And so I really, really try as hard as I can to have my students understand those things, and we talk through those things. We certainly address it a lot with leaders, but I talk about it with the entire band, and in all the guitar classes, we bring those things up and so on. So I know that was a lot, but that's kind of where it's at.
Well, I hear so much intentionality in your speaking. Yeah. I hear so much of, this is something that is a core value for me, and it's part of everything that I think about. It's part of how do you have that individual student be valued, how we're developing community. And what kind of rose to the top for me as you were speaking there, Scott, is I heard so much agency, is that we want to give the students the tools, the skills to be able to make positive decisions that will affect change.
Yeah, absolutely.
So I have something that I'd like to kind of bounce off you, because this is something that we see in a lot of the work that we're doing in the SEL space, where we come out and we champion identity, belonging, agency, and we're just as guilty of buzzwords as anyone else, right? But then when we put it out there and the students try it, the students are so conditioned to, well, you're the teacher, you just do it, and they're actually uncomfortable with that agency. They're actually uncomfortable being put in that position to make decisions for themselves. How do you respond when you have that student who may not be ready for what we know, to be honest, it's the spinach, it's good for them. We want this to be a lab for life.
Yeah, for me, it's whether or not it's high stakes. The students see things in hierarchies of, does this matter? Does this count? Am I being graded on this? Like to what level does it come in at the students? And so I really try, when I find those students who are like, hang on here, Meta, I don't want to buy in, or I'm not participating in this particular way, is to try to make it low stakes, that this is just a conversation. Let's just have a conversation about how this could play out. And, we maybe walk through a made up scenario or something like that. I do that a lot in the leadership training where they, pull scenarios out of a hat and we talk through possible reactions, and they talk in small groups and they share out their ideas, and then we talk in larger groups and so on. And so I think that when it can be in maybe, as I said, low stakes or sort of a controlled environment is where you can maybe drop ideas or start some of those conversations, or even something small like, what kind of music do you like? It's a conversation. What makes you like that music? And then that leads to the next thing of, well, was there anything that you think that would be interesting for us to play, or maybe that we could write together, and we could do a composition project, or a small something, with a section or something like that, so that they can start to see that they have ideas that are valid and that are relevant. And so that, as I said, it's almost like giving them permission to be there and to make those decisions in that space without it's kind of like tricking them, right? It's like, it's okay, try this, it's good for you, but it's very low stakes. And then as we get into more things, because I really do think it becomes part of the culture. When you first were speaking and talking, the very first thing that came to my head was, it's really about the culture of openness from the teacher and from the student, and the role of the conductor, sage on the stage versus guide on the side, facilitator. And so I think it's up to each individual educator to how they see themselves before we start to see how that can manifest in our classrooms and with our students. And so that's really, it becomes that culture. But regardless of how you want to say it, the teacher still controls the culture, right? So there's still that piece of this that is still teacher-centric. But does the teacher share that power? Does the teacher share that privilege? Does the teacher share that ownership of the space and the classroom and the discussions and the all the things, versus so on. So go ahead, jump in here.
Scott, I am so glad you said that, because I think sometimes when people hear agency, they think, well, they're not ready for that, or they can't make those decisions, and I'm giving up control and power, and it's going to be chaos. And thank you for elevating what agency actually really does look like. I think for me, there's some decisions that I'm going to make, right? Because that's my job. But I think there are more decisions that students make that they can make than we typically give them credit for.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely.
So everything that you just said, I'm on fire for. Everything you just said, Scott, is beautiful. And I think that it epitomizes what it looks like when we embed social and emotional learning into a learning space where the students are seeing this as an opportunity, a safe space that, you talk about how the students need to have a space that's low stakes. I see that as developing the skill of vulnerability so that you can make it to some high stakes decisions and still feel safe doing so. But everything, I would find few people in our country who would hear you speak about that and say, that's not a good thing. That's not a good thing. Those all sound to me like really open, incredible educational opportunities. Unfortunately, we're in a culture right now where social and emotional learning is not equally positively received depending on where we are. So what are your thoughts on this kind of either, and I'm going to be blunt in my perception, there's no middle ground. It's either social and emotional learning is the best thing since sliced bread, or we're not touching it with a 10-foot pole. It's one or the other. I mean, we're living in the extremes here. So what are your thoughts on that?
Well, it's a big country, and there's a lot of different views, and polarization, as you said, is certainly a reality. And I think that personally, it's how you approach it. The goals don't change, but the language might have to change. And I've had discussions with administrators, both here locally and across, where they believe that social emotional learning, administrators believe social emotional learning is incredibly important. But if we call it student mental health or well-being, and you approach it that way, because it's not indoctrination, let's be clear. This type of approach is culturally responsive. You're listening to the students, you're asking the students to be involved in their education. It's a partnership. Like, none of that to me is controversial. It's about fulfilling and lifting up students and centering the students in their education, which is critical in any setting. I would want that as an employer, right? We want our bosses now, whatever field you're in, education, engineering, medical field, you want your bosses to lift up your work and ask your opinion and have you be involved in those decision making, right? And it's no different. It's no different than the expectations you would have for your employer as what we're asking the students to do in their classroom. But again, in a way that is appropriate, developmentally appropriate, and so on. And so I think, and this might not be the right answer, and I actually want to hear your opinion too, but I do think sometimes it's the language that we use, it's the terminology that we use, that there are those political buzzwords that are just going to get you zapped. But if you can approach it and the goals don't shift, but the language has to shift a little bit, that's fine. And I have colleagues who disagrees with that. They feel like the word equity means equity, and that's what we're going for, and we're not going to call it something other than what it is. And personally, I worry that I don't want to lose the forest for the trees, right? I don't want to lose the fact that we're trying to achieve these goals and give students agency and give students that choice, that chance to have a choice in their classroom versus sort of a prescribed. I mean, this is why core subjects and national curriculum don't work, right? We've seen that in a variety of settings. It's because there's so much richness and uniqueness in every community, in every school district across the country, and who better than the teachers there to know what's best for those students? And and so I think it's about working in partnership. I'll also say this, you hear a lot about parents should control, parents should have a say so in terms of this pushback against SEL or against the teaching profession. Let's work together. Open the doors. My band room doors, my music classroom doors are open all the time for any parent, any school board member, any community member that wants to come in and be part. In fact, they get to hear me weeks at a time at camp outside at our practice field and at the stadium on a bullhorn. I don't know any other teacher that teaches in front of the entire community, for 6-8 hours a day for 2 or 3 weeks, right? Than us. They hear everything what we say to our students. And so, sorry, I'm a little bit on my soapbox about that, but nonetheless, the doors are open. And so when we can work in partnership with the parents, with these people, I think that they would understand and see there's no harm that's coming to students. There's no brainwashing that's going on here. There's truly just genuine care for the education that the students are receiving, and that their well-being and their safety and their potential for their own growth as a human and as a future contributor to society is there.
And Scott, that's exactly right. And I think from an SEL perspective, where we've really worked diligently is in the precision of our language. That when we get in trouble is when SEL lives in just this mythical ethos that hangs over our heads. And it's like, oh, we're going to do social and emotional learning today. And, I will be the first to say that there's variability in quality of implementation and how organic it is to subject matter. So there's variability in education no matter what you're looking at. So for me, that's why I find a lot of strength in the precision of the language we're using. And, as you said, we got to work together with parents. I couldn't agree more. When we talk about that pillar in social and emotional learning of belonging, that's belonging within our student community, belonging as a school community, but there's layers outside, and that's with our community, that's with our parents, that's with families. And until we really embrace that, there's always going to be some level of us, them, what you're doing in school and what you're doing out of school. And that's what SEL is trying to break down, actually, right. At its heart, is how are the skills that we're building in school going to benefit our students outside of school? And until we understand what that bridge looks like, it's really, really tricky. I firmly believe that when we're starting to talk to the community and we're starting to understand that gets us, and I'm going to use something that, to be honest, it was said to me in a faculty meeting and I cringed, but it's like, remember your why, right? So I do believe there's power in that. I do believe there's power in that, though. And to understand the why of what we're doing goes deeper. It's why are students in our space? Why do students choose to be part of the music program? And as you talk about, you're in the elementary school recruiting, right? That why is we need to have a really clear vision for why. And that why has to be rooted in them being able to see themselves in this space, them being part of a community that it feels good, and that they're able to see how that's going to benefit them both in the current moment and then outside. And to me, when you say, Scott, how do I envision this social and emotional learning amidst the politicization and the polarization? It's that. And, every day of the week and twice on Sunday, I would rather do social and emotional learning and not call it SEL than the converse. And I'm okay with that. I do think that there's an intentionality that comes with being able to call it something. I do believe that there's an intentionality that comes with being able to say, this is what I'm doing, and there's some learning, and there's some thinking, and there's some common vocabulary. I think that's the biggest thing that comes with calling it SEL is it gives us common language. We have an entry point. I mean, like if I said quarter note and you interpret it in a very different way, well, we're up the creek. We have common language that we understand what a treble clef is. When we start to have these conversations around SEL, I just think it gives us strength. It helps us cut through so many of the challenges that we're facing. So, I think we're in a space right now that we still have the vast majority of the people that we're surveying in extreme favor of looking at social and emotional learning. The last survey that we saw was about 93% of parents, students, administrators, and teachers are in favor of social and emotional learning in schools. That's a huge majority. If I have 93% of anything, I'm really, really happy. So thank you for your perspective there, Scott. And I think that no one knows where we're going to be in 5 years from an SEL perspective, from a how Blue Shades is going to go on the October 6th concert perspective. But I'm going to ask you to crystal ball, Mr. President. Where's the profession going to be in 5 years?
Well, I hope, and I say this with hope, is that I really hope that to see the profession more united. I think back to the worst of COVID in April, May, probably through September, October of 2020, and then into that next spring of 2021 when we were locked down and we couldn't connect except through technology, right? What we're doing. And we've learned a lot from that. But the thing that I saw, and I was so blown away, I was president-elect for NAFME, and you see how organizations and school systems and just systems in general, what do you do? When the world shuts down, what happens? What I was so blown away by, especially given the privilege that I've had, was that the music education community rallied together. We said, we have got to stay together. And companies, I'm not going to name any just to be politically correct, but companies were giving away free software, free access to all sorts of resources. Music educators, music education associations were throwing out all kinds of supports and resources and webinars and come and let's just talk. Like for you did this, let's just talk about SEL, or let's talk about teacher mental health and how we're going to get through this together. And we locked arms as a profession and created so many new pathways and so many new pathways to connect, but also tangibles, right? New curricula, new ways of teaching, new modalities that we never really thought about before because we didn't have to. And so that idea of what is a traditional music education to me almost thinks about what was pre-pandemic, what is post-pandemic, right? And so I say all that to give a frame of reference because we rallied together. We saw the need to make sure that we could keep making music in whatever way that we could. And it wasn't just performance. There was creating, there was responding, there was certainly tons of connecting. And that's where the SEL certainly comes into play as well. And so there was this elevation. And then all of a sudden, the worst of the pandemic gets behind us. And some have kind of gone back to what was comfortable. And it also gave a very, very, very deep appreciation to making music as a community. And so I think that some of the competition piece of music education, and I don't want to, this is not a criticism because there is a place and a space for that that's healthy and appropriate. But that edge, that competitive edge, I think kind of was a little less. And so what I really hope to see in 5 years is that we can capture, and I really believe, I'm interrupting myself, but I'll say this. I think we're right at the sweet spot right now. I think 23-24 school year is at the sweet spot where we can see what the new normal is going to be. And we have choices to make about what the new normal is going to be. And so that 5 years from now, what I hope is that it's a community of people that are working together in partnerships that we've never seen before, and that there is support for music education that we've never seen before. I can speak specifically for NAFME on this one and tell you that the output of information and the work that we are doing now in the last year and a half is way more with a smaller staff, because we had to downsize because of COVID and finances. And we're doing way more to support music educators than we did before when we had a larger staff, because it's so important that we're there supporting the teachers, and that we're working with our partners, and that we're, have our ear to the ground to what truly the needs are with the MEAs, with those state associations, with our partners in the industry and other music education, and just education partners as well, not just music, arts, certainly the arts ed partnerships as well. And so that crystal ball, is always as tricky to see. But I think there's a ton of great work that can be done to move the profession forward from a pedagogical standpoint, from a curricular standpoint, to take those lessons that we learned that I mentioned about the technology and so on. And also from that community that there are more students that have more access to music education. I'm going to give NAM a shout out. There are a million more music makers. That's an amazing initiative to get, sort of that community music happening, guitar, ukulele, whatever that may be, that more people in this country are making music. Because I don't know too many people that are making music together that are fighting. I don't know too many music people that when you're making music together, I don't know too many situations where there's, clashes, arguments. Maybe you want to decide what the chord's going to be, or, that kind of thing. But we can put our differences aside when we're making music together. And so I think that these initiatives that we're seeing both inside NAFME as well as with partners are going to position our society, our communities, both at a large scale and at a very small local scale, to have more connection through the arts, through music. I had a wonderful conversation with our friends at Music Will this summer. And Mary Claxton, I'll give her a shout out. Mary Claxton is just an amazing music educator. And I said to her, what's your crystal ball? This is kind of a similar thing. And she said, Scott, think about the day when schools are producing students, and I don't mean producing from a factory standpoint, but students have the experiences to create and produce themselves the music that they can then take to their community and keep making that for the rest of their lives, because the community has this rich, vibrant arts and cultural piece to it, that it's all in tandem, that the schools have all these different experiences of whatever that may be. And that could be a community band. That could mean choirs in various ways. That could be, so, when we think of, I hate to use the word traditional, but that kind of ensemble feel, but that could be coffee shop music, right? That could be music on the street corners, of ensembles that we've never even heard of before, or that could be, drumming, of some kind, and drum circles. I don't want to start naming because there's just so many things, but that vision Mary shared of schools working in tandem to create this culture for their community, to me, gets me really, really, really excited. And I know that's something that we're talking about at NAFME, because we can't keep doing what we've always done and expect a different result. That's insanity. So we need to be able to adapt with the times, change with the times, become truly a 2023, or in your case, 2028 Music Education Association, as NAFME is. But I think that's also, I would say the same thing about our schools, right? We need to become a 2023 to 2028 school, and we have our ear to that ground to know what the culture and the community want and what kind of expectations are there. And I see it happening. I really do. And so that's where I say, locking arms, working together to do some of this thing. It's very exciting. It's very, very exciting.
Scott, such powerful words and actions and tangible. You referenced NAM's Million More Musicians, and to harken back to something that we were talking about earlier, maybe a little flexibility. I wonder with that, how much of it is not necessarily physical beings, a million more physical beings, but more of a broadening of the definition of musicianship and musicians, so that we have a million more people who are making music that is appreciated, accepted, and they see themselves as musicians. That's one of the things that I work the hardest at. And students come in saying, either I'm not a musician, I'm not an improviser, I'm not a composer, and I have to break down so many walls for them to be able to see that as part of their identity. And I think in our journey to have a million more musicians, it's, well, let's find where they are musicians and build that and nourish that.
Yeah, and it's not just that. I want to throw this out there too. It's multiple literacies, right? We think about music literacy as one lens of I read traditional notation and that's that. And you and I both know that's not the case at all. That there are many competencies and literacies and pedagogies, plural, and that are out there. And that to me is what gets me really excited, is that we can lift up more people and their music. I think the greater, the richer we're all going to be. With music education, Dr. Tim Lussners always likes to say 2 + 2 doesn't equal 4 in music, right? 2 + 2 equals 24 or 48 or 68 or whatever it may be. And that's the excitement when you see different types of music and different musics, different modalities, different literacies, as I already mentioned, being lifted up and being able to be having validation. I think that's it, and value across the community in a school. That's just, to me, that's very, very exciting. And I think that that's also tying into NAFME's goal of equity in music education, because that speaks to the fact that we know there have been many communities that have been historically marginalized, and to be able to give all people music, have their music and music together, that it's not this othering, that's not this hierarchy, that this is better than this and so on, I think just really is exciting. So I hope in 5 years, to kind of come back to that we can see more people making more music that is authentic and as rich and as meaningful to them as it is to those of us that love a great jazz band that's swinging and love a great marching band out on the field, because that has a place too. And that's the point. All of this music has a place and a space, and it belongs in schools, in communities, and so on.
It's always a yes and.
Yeah.
It's always a yes and. Everyone who's either watching or listening to this is like, wow, Scott's doing great work as president of NAFME. He's doing great work in his school district, his community, his family. What's next? And obviously you said that you were president-elect. Now you're in the heat of things. You'll have another year. What are other projects that are cooking for you?
Well, I'll tell you, I'm very interested right now on the national standards. So the national standards of their current edition came out in 2014. We're coming up on 10 years. Right now, we're working with many partners on a review process for the national standards. And so I am working closely with our staff on how that's going to go. But the national standards, we received a grant as a coalition. This is not NAFME. This is the NCAS, the National Coalition for Art Standards, just to be clear. NAFME is part of that. But the coalition received a grant to look at the standards through the lens of DEIA, to be able to say there's the language and the goals and the pieces and all those different components that are in the standards. Do they stack up to 2023, 2024, 10 years later, to what the expectations may be in schools? And I'm really excited about this work. I plan to continue working alongside our NAFME staff and along with the people at NCAS on what the next version of the standards may be, because after this review, will determine, is it time for an overhaul? Is there time for revision? Is it time for a reimagining? And so I'm excited to be part of that work going forward. I'll continue to teach music here in the school as a past president of NAFME and so on. I definitely plan. I've got some years left. I definitely plan to keep doing those things and being the best dad and husband and son and grandpap and all those sorts of things as I can be. But beyond that, I don't know. There's a lot of possibilities. I will say this: being the NAFME president certainly has privilege, and I want to recognize that up front. I've had a lot of people and support and wonderful mentors that have given me opportunity, and I recognize that. And I know that very few people will ever have the opportunity to serve at this level of as a national president. And so with that, as I mentioned, comes opportunity. And so we'll see what comes knocking after this chapter of the presidency closes. But I am certainly very grateful and humbled to have had this experience and to be able to meet so many amazing people. And that's the best part of this position. I have to say up front, it's the best part of the people, because there are so many dedicated, insanely creative music educators out there. And right now I've got the privilege to travel the country and see all the great things that are happening and help them tell the story, and that's I try to use the privilege the best I can. So anyhow,
Well,
yeah.
and totally know, as someone who travels a good deal, not as much. You got miles on me, my friend, but the impact that it has on our families, right? I mean, it's profound, and we have families who give us the grace to be able to do that, and we talk about being thankful for things, being able to balance and have hats. Scott, my friend, this has just been such a joy to be able to talk about the profession, to see your perspective. Both, you're one of the unique human beings that I think is able to have such a large view, but also bring it right down to the classroom. And I am so thankful to be able to have that, to talk through so many of these things that are so powerful on our minds. Scott, how can people find you if they want to learn more or reach out, or maybe have a question for a modicum amount of your time?
Sure, absolutely. And I do my very best to stay in touch with anyone that reaches out. The easiest way to do it is just to go to the NAFME website. Right now, that's the quickest way. You can also find me in Hollidaysburg, where the Golden Tigers, Hollidaysburg, Pennsylvania, and you can find me on the school district website there. So those are probably the two easiest ways to get a hold of me. SheehanMusicEd@gmail.com is my email, if that helps. Maybe we can throw that into the chat, or however that would be with this production. But yeah, certainly happy to reach out and listen and answer questions, or just stay connected with people.
Scott, you are the definition of a servant leader. And when we start to think about how we can build some of these skill sets, I think you exemplify so many of them. As a model, one of the most powerful things we can do in the space of social and emotional learning is model some of these ideals for our students. And you just do that so powerfully for your students, for your family, for your community, for our country. So with gratitude, Scott, thank you so much for sharing time with us today and for your service to NAFME and to our profession.
Thank you very much. Great to be here. Thank you.
Such profound thanks to Scott. For Music for All, I'm Scott Edgar. Have a great day.